Hello, and thank you all for joining us today for our presentation on how to make grant writing easier. I'm Ingrid Miller, a product manager for Bio-Rad's Biotechnology Explorer program. I'd like to introduce Stan Hitomi, our grant writing expert and presenter today. Stan is the district coordinator of math and science and the principal of Alamo School for the San Ramon Valley Unified School District. Stan has been involved in education for 32 years, with 24 years as a classroom teacher. He is the former executive director of the Edward Teller Education Center at UC Davis, Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, and he currently serves on the board of directors for the Center for the Future of Teaching and Learning. In 1996, Stan was named Teacher of the Year by the San Ramon Valley Unified School District. Stan is also a Carnegie Scholar, a TeachEach Awardee by the Schwab Foundation, and currently serves as a member of the advisory board for the College of Natural Sciences at California State University, Chico, and he is co-chair of the task force on teaching and California's future. We welcome Stan's expertise in grant writing as he has successfully secured over $5 million in funding for educational programs. If you have questions during today's presentation, please submit them to the presenters via text chat. We will try to answer as many of your questions as possible at the end of the presentation. We also want to let you know that this webinar is being recorded and will be sent to you after the event. The PowerPoint presentation and the toolkit materials will also be emailed to you after the presentation. And I'd like to let Stan take the floor. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Ingrid, and good afternoon to all of you on the West Coast. And I should say good evening to those of you who are joining us from the East Coast. And I know we also have some teachers joining us from Canada as well. So thank you all for spending this time. And it's amazing to see teachers who are willing to spend time out of their busy days to join us for looking at how they can bring innovation into the classroom. I want to say that we've been holding grant writing workshops through NSTA at regional and national conferences, and we just thought we'd try doing the webinars to see if it might be a better way to reach more teachers from the comfort of wherever you are right now. And I want to thank all of you that took the time to do the pre-reg survey and give us some important information. You see on the slide here that we've come up with some learning goals that you thought were important for us to know about. A lot of you mentioned time as being an issue with grant writing, finding enough time to write grants. You were interested in finding out how you can reduce the complexity of writing grants so that it would be much easier to access as novice writers. People expressed concerns about budgets, some pointers and tips on how to work with budgets. And of course, always, where do you find the funding sources? So we have tailored this around your needs. We know from the surveys that about 2/3 of you have tried writing a grant before, and that about 1/3 of you have actually received funds or dollars from writing grants. That you range from middle school through high school and into college and university teachers, so we have a broad range. We know that most of you are interested in purchasing equipment with grant money, although some of you are also interested in finding funds for supplies. But I think the bottom line is that all of you are interested in finding out tips that you can use, whether or not you're a novice or you have written grants from somebody who has had some experience. And I have been writing grants for over 20 years, and hopefully we'll be able to pass some of that information on to you this afternoon for some of you. So let's jump ahead and take a look. There are a lot of places where different types of categories. There are awards, but the issue with the awards is that you have to receive the awards, and it generally takes some type of background accomplishments to get an award. There are scholarships, but scholarships tend to be for things like tuition and registration fees. So when you really think about it, grants are really the source of funding that is widespread and provides an avenue for teachers to bring innovation to their classroom. So we're going to focus today on grants specifically. Parts: how to write a grant, how to design a program, and how to search for funding. And simply put, you're spending an hour with us. We want you all to leave ready to apply for a grant. We're going to focus on grants in the range of about $500 to $5,000, and I know some of you have already received grants in excess of $10,000, and I know for a fact that some of the tips that we're going to share today are going to be beneficial to anybody, no matter where you are on the grant continuum. And that's one thing I've learned in grant writing is there's always something to learn right around the corner. So hopefully we'll have something for everybody during this webinar. One of the approaches that we're going to take today is different, I think, and that is we're taking a toolkit approach. In my work with working teachers in our district, I find that the thing they ask for most often is, can I see what that looks like? Can I get a sample? So we've taken that approach. We've put a sample letter of support, a sample proposal, a complete proposal, by the way, and a sample budget and narrative. And those will be sent out to you after the conclusion of the webinar so that you have those. Just a cute story from this week. Two of our teachers received grants this week. We had one teacher receive funds for a weather station, and another teacher receive a grant for a document camera. And you know, they're always, like I said, they're always asking for samples, previous grants that were written that they can look at to learn about style and content. So you'll be getting that all in the form of a toolkit. So let's talk about proposal process. Now, the thing I'm going to say right off the top is there is no typical steps. In other words, because not all grant applications look alike. They are different. They ask for different things. But I think these 5 steps in general will get you ready to apply for a grant. Now, that's an important thing to say. One of the things that I noticed is that it always seems that when I get a grant proposal sent to me, it's always due like in 2 weeks. You know, why is that? Well, think what you do to be ready is you just have a template ready ahead of time. So when that application becomes available, whether it's 2, 3, 4 weeks away from a deadline, you're ready to go. So these are the 5 steps that we're going to cover along the way. Identifying your contact team, identifying need, designing a program, finding a funding source, and writing a proposal. So probably the most important step along the way is to put your team together. Now, I realize that if we're talking about a $500 grant, that team might be you, just a classroom teacher working by yourself. But as much as possible, I recommend that you partner. And it's just a really great thing. And here's just a quick list of people that you might consider working with. Obviously, an administrator would be important because they are the ones who quite oftentimes will have to approve the grant being submitted, or the K-12 level. It could be a principal, it might be an assistant principal, colleges, university, it might be your dean or your division or department chair. A lot of people overlook people like counselors who can provide information. I think in all of these cases, the assessment coordinator, community relations officers, these are people who can save you time, and time was a key concern that most of you had, because these people have access to information that you might need for the grant, or networking with other people in the community to bring on board with the grant. That would save you that very important time element so that you can get the grant out. Obviously, if you're working towards larger grants, you'll have to even bring additional people, such as external evaluators, into your program. My tip would be, think about what would be your ideal team. If you have a small grant, you're going to have a smaller group, quite typically. If you have a larger grant, you may have a larger group. But please keep in mind, larger isn't always better. You know, maybe a group of 2 to 4 is ideal, maybe up to 6. Sometimes when you get too many people, it becomes too much of a process and actually takes more time than less. So, need. And I will admit, when I first started writing grants, I really struggled with need. I knew I needed things for my classroom. I just wasn't sure how to articulate it. And so I've come up with a real simple model, and that is what I call the 3 R's: relevance, rigor, and relationships. These are what my students need in the classroom. Relevance, when I speak of relevance, I'm talking about real-world connections. So in our area, I live in the Bay Area of California. We have a lot of pharmaceutical industries. Being able to connect my students to those industries via labs, via mentors, are important connections to make. It really makes it relevant. When we talk about rigor, we're talking about the need for academic performance. This could be grades, improvement in standardized tests, maybe more students taking college prep those courses within your department or area. Um, and when we talk about relationships, we're talking about, I can think of two different distinct models. Uh, the relationship between the teacher and the student, maybe moving away from direct instruction and moving more towards mentoring around student research. And also the whole relationship between students and people outside of the classroom, taking on scientists and industry mentors that can help them with independent research projects. Keep in mind that the need might be a combination of these. It could be relevance and rigor, or it might be all three, depending on your proposal. So here's the fun part, and that's really kind of thinking of your dream, your vision of what you would like your project to be. I think the reality check is you need to start off by saying, where am I, and what's my capacity right now? So I often talk about your need could be a model that goes in. And think about that, because at this point right now, you may not be ready to go to the deluxe model of having a large scale biotech type of laboratory. Maybe at this point you're ready for just a real simple demo. But no matter what, I will guarantee you, because you're the type of person who has sought out this to grow. So as you grow, some important considerations are partnerships and collaboratives. I call this kind of the first couple, vertical articulation. For schools, K-12, you might think about partnering with colleges, universities. Community colleges are great partners because they are in close proximity to many of the schools. For colleges and universities, these are also important because of creating these pathways. I think a lot of you may have heard of these 2+2+2 programs where there's coursework in the high school that articulates with the middle school, which articulates to the four-year college university. I think these are important. Think about business and industry. This is important both from the relevance and also from the rigor point of view, actually with the relationship as well. But I want to say that don't limit your vision to just businesses that are in the biotech or science field. Think about all the possible resources. Looking for ways to work with schools, to provide resources to schools, and they just don't know what those entry points might look like. And speaking of non-science oriented groups, quite often there are service and nonprofit organizations with Rotaries, clubs like the Kiwanis Club, the Chamber of Commerce, groups like this that are interested in working with schools but may not be directly related to science. Another part is to work outside of your building, to work with other schools, to work with other schools within your district. And again, as I said, with colleges and universities, articulating with the schools in the area. These are really important. And I think another one that's oftentimes overlooked are parents in the community. I think one of the best things I did early on in my career was I started passing first day of school and having students write down, their parents' names and contact information, and then I asked them write down where they work and what their job title is. And it never failed that. It was like a Christmas. I would start looking through those cards right away to see if there's anybody connected to the science community where they would be able to donate materials to my program. So these are all really important considerations to think about. So I guess my tip here would be, when you think about partnerships and designing a program, when you think about grants are really looking at impact. In other words, if we're going to give money or we're going to provide money and make it available to programs, what's the impact going to be? How many students are we going to affect? And this is where partnering and going beyond your walls can really, really help out. Okay, so we've just kind of got our feet wet into this webinar, but I wanted to just check and make certain people know that they can send questions via test chat, and we'll get to those at the end of the program. And for people that may have come on board a little bit late, a reminder that the PowerPoint slides that you're seeing and also the toolkit, which includes the samples of the support, those will also be sent out to you following the webinar. So notes and things, but at this point, you're going to get all this information sent to you. Okay, so the all-important writing a proposal. So this is something that right away every grant's going to ask, is to give some general information about your school, your college or school. And getting that information quite often to teachers is not an easy thing to do. But there's a lot of places where you can find that information. There are school accountability reports, district reports, school plans. There's accreditation at both the K-12 and at the higher ed, national and state assessments. But again, here's my point. Find somebody who knows where this information is. If you're not the expert, there's somebody around who is, and seek those people out, because they could probably do something in 3 minutes that will take you 3 hours. So this is part of that time saving and maybe that frustration that teachers go through that they really don't. And I think the key is, and I'll say this over and over again, when you seek out these people to do this bit of work for you, make sure they recognize, I use the term that it's light lifting, that I'm asking something to you very specific, and not your time to do, but would help you in the grant writing process immensely. So the tip is, once again, find those experts, reduce the amount of time that you're spending, find people that know how to do those tasks, and know where those sources of information are. Okay, so I am now going to go through a sample proposal, and this is just a quick outline that shows you. Again, you're going to get this proposal in its entirety, full text, but I will specifically go over need, abstract, description, evaluation, budget and justification, and letter of support. And again, this is what I would call a typical proposal. By no means going to fit all exactly, but it'll give you the general outline. So we're going to start off with the abstract. And this is important because throughout the entire process of writing a proposal, you need to think about who's reading it. And this poor group, I've been on the other end of it, where I've sat there and somebody's just handed me a pile of 35 applications, and I'm going to have to read through those. So the first thing that they're going to read is very compelling. And even though it's the first thing that they read, it's often the last thing that you write, because you really want to write that abstract when you're all done. And through the process of writing that grant, you would have learned a lot about what your thinking is. And so that's really the best time to write that abstract, is at the very end. It's going to provide a complete but generalized overview of the program. And this is a tip that I got, maybe as late as 5 years ago, where somebody told me, that abstract should be suitable for press release. And that really started to make me think, well, if it's suitable for press release, then it must be written in more general terms. And that's really helped me to think through writing the abstract. So the tip, make it interesting, because once again, you're trying to differentiate your proposal from a whole pile of other proposals, and it really is going to be that piece that captures somebody's attention. It's like the first impression. Okay, so let's take a look at this sample abstract that I've put together. Like my catchy title, Biotech by the Bay. We're in the Bay Area of California. All right. So what I'm going to highlight here are just a couple things. First of all, in this abstract, I'm talking about this growing crisis, the shortage of scientists and engineers in America. So that's kind of the compelling point that I'm making up. But then I'm also adding down here in the abstract this section here that says Biotech by the Bay has grown out of the district's belief that the science programs at our school should reflect 21st century science, and to go on to say using advanced scientific equipment and connecting students to the real world of science. So right away what you're seeing is I'm going back to the 3 R's, right, or at least a couple of R's here, where I'm talking about the rigor of advanced scientific equipment and connecting students to the relevance piece to science. So the other thing I'm going to show you real quickly here is, notice this is not a real long abstract, but I have put the need in there. And I've also put in what I call some specifics, what I call making it very explicit. So I've made it very explicit in saying that we're approaching 9th grade integrated science, 10th grade biology programs, And notice down here I've even snuck in a very explicit lab that we're going to be doing, DNA fingerprinting. Once again, try to be concrete. Because again, the reader is reading so many things that the more things stand out, the more things are explicit, the more it's going to reflect upon your proposal. So let's take a look at the big part. The big part of a proposal is the description or narrative. This is the large body. And depending on the proposal, and in general, I find this to be a limiting area. In other words, quite often they'll say, description, you are limited to 1 page, or you're limited to 2 pages. Believe it or not, I wrote a grant the other day that said you're limited to 10 pages, and it wasn't enough. So quite often you have to take a look at describing what you're going to do, who's going to do it, the timeline, and try to fit all of that into the number of pages they allow you to have. And so what's really important is that you minimize the fluff here. You be explicit, particularly in regards to what are the students doing. The reader should be able to visualize those students in a classroom and what they're doing. Another tip I picked up just shortly, a short time ago, that there are ways to reduce the amount of wording needed and also to make it easier to understand your proposal. And that's through the use of charts, and I'll show you an example. And I think I saw this trend coming out, 5-10 years ago, which is fairly recent for me, I guess, in my time frame, and that's sustainability. As dollars become short, funders want to know, is the investment that I'm making in a proposal going to have a long-term benefit? And so this concept of sustainability. So I will go through those here, but I'm going to leave you another tip. So I gave you the 3 R's a second ago. Now I'm going to give you the 3 C's. When dealing with description and in other areas of the proposal, you need to be concise, concrete, and consistent. When I say concise, that means, again, remove the fluff, just get down to the point. Be concrete, that means put in those explicit terms about grade levels, courses, labs that you're doing. And then following, be consistent. They all have to fit together. The professional development, the equipment, the standards that you're addressing, or the course content, they all should fit together and make sense. And that's real important. All right, so here is a statement of need. And you don't always get to make a statement of need, but you can always place it into your proposal at some point. Here we are working off of a national document called Rising Above the Gathering Storm. It's from the National Academies of Science and Engineering, and they talk about this growing crisis in America and the decrease in number of students interested in moving into STEM. So quite conveniently in our proposal, we say that Biotech Bay addresses recommendations 1 and 3. So we're talking about moving the U.S. K-12 education system to a leading position by global standards, and this is the big one for us, encouraging more U.S. citizens to pursue careers in STEM. That's really what we're going to try to do. And then we come back and we're very explicit. We make the statement here, currently over 20% of the incoming 9th graders at XY High School take a science course. Less than 50% of the students take 3 or more years of science, and only 23% of the students take the recommended 3 years of science for acceptance into the University of California. So this is the compelling need. We're giving very specific numbers, and obviously we're going to try to improve upon those numbers with our proposals. All right, so one of the things I do is in our district, I will tell teachers, if you have a proposal, please send them to me and I will read them. And I will tell you, it's unbelievable, but quite often I'll read a proposal and I can't find the goals. Either they're not there or they're hidden. So notice here under description, I start off with the goals clearly stated right here. Okay, it says goals, and it describes them as teacher goals and student goals. And again, when you have somebody reading a lot of these, having things in bullet form, in table form, in numbered form, really do help. It focuses their attention and tells them what is important. So here, my teacher goals. Receive training to master biotech skills and knowledge. This addresses rigor. Incorporate real worlds of scientific research into their classroom instruction. This is relevance. In the student goals, Master biotech skills and knowledge in a standards-based program of study. Back to the rigor. Learn to use advanced scientific equipment. This is both rigor and relevance. And increased interest in pursuing careers and education in science. There is the relationships part. So again, you have to have goals, and people will be looking for goals. It's usually on the scoring sheet they use to score a grant. Okay? Now, the proposal that you'll be getting, the full proposal on Biotech by the Bay, the sample, has 4 different components. It has a teacher research experience, where teachers go into a laboratory, study underneath laboratory scientists. It's a 3-day program. There's a teacher training component where the teachers that are trained come back to the district and they train other teachers. It's a capacity building component. And then classroom access to advanced scientific equipment. There you go. That's what I want to buy, that equipment. And then standards-based curriculum focusing on relevant real-world science. Now, I'm not making the readers hunt for this. Again, notice just a couple sentences under each one, and I've been able to describe the programs, the components of the program. Again, don't make it hard on the readers. They should be able to find this information quite readily. Okay, I'm really proud of this one because I was in a grant and I told you I had 10 pages to describe the project, and I was running closer to 12 pages, and I had to cut. And we had a consultant working with us, and she said, you know, tables are a great way to go. So take a look at this table. It really is a thing of beauty. So what it does is it shows, it's an overview, instruction, and student impact all at once. So it clearly describes who the audience is. 9th grade integrated physical science, and it also works with 10th grade biology. It clearly describes what they're doing in the classroom. Okay, they're doing an electrophoresis lab with cabbage juice. They're doing dielectrophoresis. They're doing DNA fingerprinting. And this is another piece that I've just started really doing recently, and that's really making the standards just sit right there in the description, making that connection. These are California standards by number and letter. They're clearly there. I haven't gone into any depth in describing them, but the reader knows, this person knows what they're talking about. They've aligned these activities to these standards. And of course, the impact with the number of students here on the end. So if you think about how much space would have taken to describe this in a narrative, it would have taken 3 or 4 paragraphs. Now I've done it in a space that is equivalent to less than a paragraph, or about a paragraph. And it's not as important, you know, yes, I am concerned about space, but secondarily, it's easy to understand. The reader of the grant knows what I'm trying to do. So this is a great add-on because it doesn't help when the reader has to struggle to understand what you're trying to do and how many grades and students are being impacted and what standards are being addressed. This can be done in a quick eye shot. The other thing is in your description, again, this level of accountability is to be extremely explicit about your timeline. Notice here I say, okay, all equipment and supplies will be ordered in June for arrival by August. This is really important. Or another piece down here again, using that word again, explicit, you know, so who's going to do the final report? Lead teachers, assistant principal, counselor, and district assessment coordinator. As often as you can put these clear terms, specific examples, that's the concrete of the 3 C's. And once again, it just adds to the strength of the credibility of your proposal. This person knows what they're doing. Okay? So, I can remember when I wrote my first grant. I think I was probably in my 6th year of teaching. And one of the areas that I really struggled with is evaluation. And I think the reason I struggled with it was I just simply tried to promise too much. I thought, this is something where I knew about professional evaluators, and I thought, wow, I just have to really, you know, do a lot more than I was capable of doing. So I think in this area, my advice would be, you know, how will you document whether the project met its goals? In other words, what's that going to look like? For example, in this proposal, we want to increase the number of students taking college preparatory classes. That's easy. You know, schools typically track what the student enrollment is. We want to see if that student enrollment grows. Maybe your enrollment, your goal will be more towards addressing who's taking those courses, if they're underrepresented minorities that you're really targeting. Again, that's easy data, but you need to identify that data up front. What's that data going to look like? Who's going to get it for you? Another piece is to have a, if possible, and again, this depends on the scope of your grant. If you're talking about a $500 grant, maybe not so much. If you're talking about a little larger grant, you may want to think about formative and summative evaluations. And this doesn't have to be fancy. It could be just at certain benchmark times after each of the main labs that you're putting in to put in an assessment piece to have some data and see how your program is working. And definitely if it's a multiple year program. But for the most part, most grants aren't multiple year. Okay. Also, most schools think about web-based data management systems. Most schools these days, or many schools these days, are going to products like EduSoft or Data Director, and you've got access to standardized tests. You can make your own assessments, your own benchmark assessments. You can take them and put contact clusters together and do some really, really high resolution alignment of standards. So this is really powerful. But again, getting back to my original statement of evaluation, do not overcommit to a level of evaluation you cannot provide. And maybe leaving here on evaluation with one final piece, data should be used as part of a cycle of inquiry. And this is, I put a little diagram on here, and you can find many different models of cycle of inquiry. But simply that means that you're in this loop of constantly looking at what's going on, refining what you're doing based upon data, and making any changes to improve the program. Okay, so let's take a look at an evaluation plan. And the one thing I want you to notice about this without even me highlighting anything is look how short it is. Really, this is my evaluation plan right here. Okay, it's not overblown, doesn't seem too overbearing, and it's concise. And right away, I think your attention is drawn to my numbers. I've numbered two components of my evaluation plan. It really you're kind of focused to it. Increased student learning as measured by end of course assessments. In other words, the final exams. The standards areas align with activities related to Biotech by the Bay. So we're going to pick those content clusters that relate directly to the grant and take a look at those. Number two is, this is part of that increasing interest that we talked about earlier on. And notice here that our evaluation plan is going to take a look at the number of UC approved A through G courses. Those are how we name the courses here in California that are University of California approved courses and are passed by students associated with Biotech by the Bay. So we're taking a look at how many of these college prep classes students are taking. And here's the thing, with most of the grants that we're talking about here, up to $5,000, in the scope of your grant, we're not going to see the significant change. That change may take 2 or 3 years. And I know teachers get hung up on this a bit. But you know what? You do what you can. And in your heart, you're doing the right thing. And although the data may not produce the result you're looking for right away, this is your thought going into the process is that you're going to improve your program, increase student learning and student enthusiasm. Down here is sustainability. This is another trick that I was taught. Again, we were writing a grant that was, I think a lot of you have heard about the stimulus money coming out of the feds, and they're talking about they want immediate and long-lasting results, right? The holy grail. How do we get all that together? Well, the sustainability component was really a high score in one of the grants I was writing, and one of the consultants we had told us about this little trick. Notice here it says that 83% of the budget is for equipment that has a life expectancy of over 10 years and one-time professional development that will increase teacher knowledge, skills, and leadership capacity. Well, think about that. If you buy equipment, it's going to be good for 10 years. If you train a teacher, it's good for a lifetime. In this project, with 83% training and equipment, has a really high sustainability capacity. So that's a real important thing to think about. Okay, so now getting to every teacher's favorite topic, budget. And I say that kind of jokingly because, and I was kind of in the same boat. Typically, a classroom teacher doesn't get to work with very sophisticated budgets or budgets with very high dollar amounts. So let me just kind of give some points here. Number one is when I wrote my first grant, I had no idea even how to put a budget together. I was very fortunate. I had a parent that worked for a science education company I kind of said, these are the things I want to buy. Next thing I knew, I had an account manager send me a quote. And lo and behold, that quote just served perfectly for me to build my budget. So, you work with vendors. They're more than happy to provide quotes for you. The other piece of budget also takes it out of your hands. All your schools, all your colleges have somebody who works in the business department. These are the people that know things such as school codes, tax ID numbers, indirect rates, and we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. They know this stuff. This is not something that you have to spend a lot of time going through and learning. This is something, again, that's light lifting on the part of somebody else. You just need to find out who that person is. And quite often, like I said, if you have an administrator with you, they will know who to go to. And if they can do that type of outsourcing of information, that'll really cut down on the amount of time you spend. Okay. The other stress point is teachers will get this grant and they'll say, oh, I budgeted $200 for micropipettes, and now I find out it's going to cost me $225. And they stress. Well, don't stress. Most grants understand this is going to happen. There's about a 10 to 15% swing that you can do in terms of changes, and most of it just means emailing the grantor and saying, my grant is off by this amount. Many grants will say right in the grant that any changes, 15% or less, can be done with without any prior approval. All right, so this is that complex looking thing that most of the time with teachers you go, wow, this is something that's got these things called object codes, and it's got things down here, certificated salary, it's got all kinds of numbers on there. Depending on the level of grant that you're going to write, you may have something as simple as a text box as far as your budget. Or as you get into higher amounts and more sophisticated grants, you start to see tables like the one that you see here. Okay, but once again, there's somebody at your site who can help you with this. This is something that you should navigate by yourself. Quite often you're asked to provide a narrative, a description. So notice here, we're going to take teachers and we're going to pay them 3 hours for 2 teachers to provide training for other teachers. And notice how I've described it here. $240.24, which equals $40.04, which is our hourly rate, times 3 hours, times 2 teachers. So once again, just some different formatting ways to describe what you're doing in a simple manner. Easy to understand. But there are some other budget areas I just want to quickly cover with you. This is one that always seems to blow teachers away. What is an indirect cost? Okay, an indirect cost, as you get into larger grants, the grants actually put a burden on your organization. Okay, if you've got a grant that's $200,000, that means somebody's doing that extra bookkeeping, somebody's checking in and receiving that extra equipment at the warehouse, and that's all part of what most organizations charge. And notice here, my district charges 4.4%. Okay, so in the case of this grant, $126 out of my $2,871 is going to go to the school district, and that's going to cover this indirect cost. It's often called a tax. Most districts will not charge any type of tax on these really small grants, and there are some grants that won't even allow you to charge a tax by a district. So this is going to vary grant by grant. This item down below is a very interesting one. It's called in-kind funding or in-kind contribution. These are things besides money that are being provided to the project that will help the project be successful. And they add to the strength of the project. For in this case here, I'm relying on our local national laboratory, Lawrence Livermore National Lab, to provide training. They're not charging us for it, but there is a cost value associated. Notice here that the value is estimated at $600 for 2 teachers times 3 days at $100 per day to send them there. So they are giving us free training. You might find similar free training at your local community college, 4-year college, maybe somebody at a local company, Clorox or Chevron or somebody is willing to give training. Well, all of that has value, and you just have to make sure that somebody is able to document what that in-kind value is. So looking down here, I just gave you a quick example of that. Okay. Now what I've written down here, this whole section down in this area here, quite often they will ask you for a separate budget narrative or justification. And all that means, I mean, it sounds pretty legalese, but all it really is to say, we want you to explain what you're spending your money on. Okay, that's what it means. So in this case down here, I've done that, but at the bottom, I've also included a short description about the in-kind contribution from the laboratory. Okay, again, I'm just trying to give you some examples of what things would look like. And again, when you look at all this, notice how concise, concrete, and consistent things are. That's the important piece. That is the same message being communicated throughout the proposal, from the budget to the description to the abstract. Okay? So let's talk about letters of support. Well, these are always fun because I get these all the time. Stan, write me a letter of support. Well, the key is don't ask me for a letter of support 24 hours before it's due. So, give people time. Give them 2 weeks at least. And also offer some help. Because when someone asks me to write a letter of support, how do I know what to write? Even though I've written many. So quite often I'll say, dear principal, will you write me a letter of support? I need it in about 3 weeks. And would you like me to provide you with a sample letter that you can use? That will give you some idea of what they're expecting to see from the grant. And I will tell you, if you provide a sample letter, 9 out of 10 times they'll say yes, I'll be happy. And guess what? They'll use that sample letter. They might make some minor adjustments to it, but you've saved them so much work. Again, keep in mind, the same time pressures that keep you from writing a grant are the same time pressures that keep people from helping you with the grant. So that sample letter is so important. Also, let them know if there are any formatting requirements before you give them the letter. Sometimes, for example, the letter has to have the original signature, in blue ink or something like that. And, instead they send you a photocopy. So let them know ahead of time if there's any formatting requirements, single spacing, double spacing, any font requirements. And here's an important piece. You should really think about, what does your letter say to the grant reader? I talk about support letters versus partnering letters, and these are very different. So let's take a look. So this is, I titled this letter of support. And I describe these as more like, yeah, I know the person, he or she does good things, and I really like them. Okay? These are nice, but they're not as compelling as something that gives much more concrete, getting back to those 3 C's again. So I've included in your sample packet a letter, and this is a letter that I would call more of a letter of a commitment, because it goes beyond just saying, I know the project, I know the people, but it starts to give some very concrete specifics in terms of, like, here's the name of Kurt White. He's the master teacher from the National Lab that's going to work with this group. It talks about a woman named Lori Huntsman, who's the program administrator, who will serve as the liaison. It gets very specific, going back to that same $600 in-kind contribution is listed here. So again, to a reader of your grant, this letter speaks volumes more than some letter that's very generic, that doesn't talk about specifics. So both of these letters are in your toolkit that you'll be receiving. Okay, so kind of wrapping up the proposal part here, follow format guidelines. These are what I call deal killers. If you don't follow format guidelines, they can get tossed, especially where people are receiving dozens and dozens of proposals and they need to kind of weed some out. Failure to follow format, easy out. Submitting the proposal on time. This has only happened to me once in my career. I missed the deadline by about 20 minutes, and guess what? It was not accepted. It's a deal killer, all right? Stay focused, don't overcommit. Stay with those 3 C's. Stay within your budget. This is real important. What the budget says, they say the grant's for $5,000. Don't ask for $5,010. As a matter of fact, I also give you the tip: stay away from round numbers. I've read many, many grants in my life. When I see a budget that says I want $3,000, it bugs me. I don't know why, but it does. I'd rather see $2,997. It seems like you put some thought into it. And I know it's probably not the right thing, but once again, remember, these people are reading an awful lot of proposals. Whenever possible, include in-kind contributions, as I mentioned before. And most important, remember, only grants that are submitted will be funded. That's real important. Okay, so let's talk about designing a program. So I'll just say a couple words about this. Again, kind of along the same lines of a demo to deluxe. Think about building a program as building blocks. So think about what you buy now. If you're starting at a demo level, think about buying with design of your program with flexibility in mind. In other words, is the stuff that I'm buying now going to grow with me? You will grow. The fact that you're here on this webinar means you're a self-motivated person. You're going to get excited as you start to do more and more things. You're going to want to grow to the next level. You're going to want to grow to the next level after that. But as you continue to grow, is your equipment designed with flexibility to grow with you? Or are you constantly buying, shelving, and buying again? So this is someplace a little later on we're going to talk about some people that can help you with this. But this is something that's really, really important because there are a lot of people that spend double the amount of money they really need to because they hadn't thought about planning for growth. So grants, when you think about them, state and national grants, usually larger, they're bigger, they're more complex. You usually put together a bigger team, higher level of accountability and evaluation. Most of you, if you're on this webinar, are probably going to think about starting on the local level. Local level grants tend to be smaller. They tend to have a local focus, which means maybe only local people can apply for them. That's really an important point. Okay. You also start to build those local relationships and partners that will enable you to apply for larger grants later on. So just some quick tips. Okay. So let's talk about where do you find this information about where to get money. Well, good place to start are your offices. Now, depending on, for example, at the University of California, we had an office that dealt specifically with grants, and there were people there that could help us with it. I'm district office in terms of K-12. There are county offices. Many of these places have newsletters, websites. Professional journals are really, really good sources. The National Science Teachers Association has a great website. They kind of hide their listing on grants. It comes under dates and events. But if you look on the NSTA website, wonderful place to look for grants. But again, keep in mind, quite oftentimes grants will appear with a very short timeline for the deadline. Your State Science Teachers Association often posts grants. Your county offices. My favorite recently has been Google. Google is a great way to look for grants. Now, I will make one caution. I've given some keywords down here that you can use when you search. This is great because most oftentimes local grants won't show up on many of these other radar screens, other than maybe county offices. But in addition to these keywords, I really, really, really emphasize do not just stick to science grants. Some of you qualify for grants for rural schools. Maybe you're looking for grants that fall under technology. Maybe you're addressing special needs students. Maybe you're taking a look at career technical education and career pathway grants, especially if you're talking about those 2+2+2 programs. So really think about searching other things than just science grants when you do your searches. And for our colleagues that are joining us here, take a look at this. Is a listing of different grants. These are all sites that I've used in the past. Each one of them has a specific button around science specifically, which makes it great. And for those people that are in Canada joining us, here are some Canadian grant sites that you might look into. And so I think what's really important again is that you need to have your grant in place. In other words, your proposal, general outline in place before you start searching. Because I'm not even sure why, but so often I click and see, oh, here's a great grant, but it's due in 2 weeks. And that just doesn't give you the time to mobilize. So the time to start planning your grant and start planning your vision is prior to actually looking for grants. So we've given you a lot of information. I really applaud the fact that you're here on this webinar with us. Teachers are incredible people. Like I say, you're here, you're interested, and you're looking into something that's actually going to make more work in your life, and that's amazing that you're willing to do it. I can remember, I think it was probably about 1987 when I got my first grant. It was for $600. I had absolutely no clue as what I was doing. I haven't really changed that much between now and then. Haven't taken professional courses, but at this point now, I've just listened and learned wherever I could, and that's where I've gotten to be where I am today. And hopefully this hour has been of benefit to you. So I'm going to close with what I've been kind of saying all along. The only grants that get funded are those that get submitted. So it's time to get going. And I'm going to leave you with an African proverb. Every morning in Africa, a gazelle wakes up. It knows it must run faster than the fastest lion or it will be killed. Every morning a lion wakes up. It knows it must outrun the slowest gazelle or it will starve to death. It doesn't matter whether you are a lion or a gazelle. When the sun comes up, you better start running. So I hope you get going. I hope you submit that grant. Do it. You will be amazed. I have submitted so many grants where I thought, this isn't going to do it. I'm not going to cash out on this one. And sure enough, it gets funded. And it gets funded because I turned it in. So we'll close with just a couple of slides. First of all, there's some wonderful people out at Bio-Rad called Curriculum Training Specialists. They're just an email away. These are people that work throughout the country. They are able to, they see all kinds of programs. They're able, and they're able to help you design and build a program, especially from the equipment standpoint. I've also included my email address in case you want to go ahead and email me a question or two. And here's a last tip. If you're interested in Bio-Rad providing a letter of support or guidance for your grant, please contact them. Bio-Rad has workshops. If you attend a Bio-Rad workshop, that's an in-kind contribution. They can write you a letter of support. And it's amazing, especially if you're writing a grant. If I'm in my community and I write a grant and I can include a letter of support from Bio-Rad, the ace hardware company of the biotech industry, it just adds volume to my credibility just in that one single piece. So feel free to approach companies like Bio-Rad for that letter. It's an important piece to your overall proposal. So I am going to thank you for the time we spent together, and I'm going to turn it back over to Ingrid to move forward.
Thank you, Stan. Before we answer questions, I'd like to let you all know that there are several resources available to you regarding grant writing. Again, these resources will be sent along to you with the playback of the webinar in a few days. Also, at the end of this session, you will have the opportunity to complete the exit survey to give us feedback on this session and to share other topics you'd like to have us present in the future. Now to questions. The first question is, I have a great program. I need to find ways to sustain it. I need tips for writing grants for programs already in existence rather than starting something new. I'm running into innovative and new too often in grants. Please help.
Yeah. So this is something we hear all the time, but actually if you have an existing program, you're actually in a pretty ideal situation because you've overcome that main hurdle of getting the capital equipment. But at that point in time, you're going to have to start looking at a couple things. Number one, I would tend to start looking for sources of funding more locally. These are smaller proposals, but you're probably looking at buying more consumable materials. Second part is partnering with local entities, those partnerships that hopefully you've built up over time that you can network with to find places where maybe you can get free reagents and materials. Or, once again, finding companies that are willing to provide, that $500 a year amount. There is one strategy I can give you that other people have used, and that is to find some of the larger companies, if you're talking like a McDonald's or some banks like Washington Mutual, people like this, actually they're not in existence anymore, so it'd be something like Chase. Some companies have these ongoing small grant programs, and I heard from a teacher at NSTA where she had paid for her consumables from McDonald's and getting grants for like 5 years at $500 a shot. So those are just a couple of things. But I think if you are asking for that type, then you need to have in your resume the fact that this is low-hanging fruit. I've done the hard work already, and that any dollars that I get now for supplies really just kind of amplifies the effect of everything that we've done until now. In other words, you're already a success. So it's not a big risk with somebody giving you that amount of money. But my tendency to think it's going to have to be local.
Thank you, Stan. Our next question says, the mobile laboratory program I work with is currently state funded, run out of a college, and serves at least 24 school districts. We have a lot of data on previous student impact, but grant funding is difficult as our program appears diffuse because each school has different teaching needs and therefore utilizes a different form of assessment and tracking. Would it be best to partner with one school district for a grant, even though ultimately any funding will help all the schools we serve?
Yeah, and and that's the thing. I think in today it's such a competitive market for dollars. Um, and I'm trying to follow your whole question. If Ingrid could move that closer to me, I could probably read. Sorry, folks, we're dealing with the technology here just a bit. So I'm one of the visual learners. I just want to make sure I got your question correct. So I'm reading it through, so excuse me for just a second. Yeah, I think so. So in reading yours, here's my strategy I would take on that. Once again, you can serve a larger population, but you can pick a subset of that population to focus on for evaluation and assessment. I think maybe that's where you're going to with this question. And yes, absolutely, that's fine, especially if you're dealing with a fairly broad-based program. Yeah, pick somebody who's got a great assessment system, who's willing to go to something like benchmark assessments to help you get really good data, really compelling data. Absolutely, I would tend to go that route. I'm not sure where you're from, but you can work closely with if you have an assessment person in your district to put that type of program together.
Thank you, Stan. The next question is, I know this is biotech centered, but I'm a physical chemistry teacher and would like to write a grant to help set up my PChem labs. Is this applicable?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I think this relevance connection is really, really important piece. As a matter of fact, just before we got online together, Ingrid's smiling right now because we did see a grant from the American Chemistry Society that would have been perfect for something like that. Yeah, I think the idea that you're making bridges across disciplines, we all know that science is not designed to be in silos. Science is designed to be integrated. And so I think that is a really strong push to do. I think it's totally relevant. If you want to add that R in there, I'm excited. Anytime I hear chemistry, and by the way, I did work at a community college where biotech didn't get off the ground, and so it took someone in the chemistry department to push it forward. So I applaud you on that effort. There's awful lot of chemistry in biotech.
Great. The next question, are there grants to support developing an undergraduate science lab curriculum?
So I don't quite, what I'm tending to think is yes, but I think it's more there's a lot of curriculum out there. So I'm not certain if, developing curriculum is the best use of time and money. There are a lot of programs out there. I think if you were to contact one of the CTSs at Bio-Rad, they'd be able to help you find it. I'm not as experienced in that area. But again, I think taking some existing materials and tailoring it specifically to your program, you're looking at more of a program development grant. And I think your question was at a collegiate level, was that correct? Undergraduate?
Yes.
Yeah. So those would be, I'm not as familiar with those, so I'm sorry I can't quite point you to any specific grants that I know of in that area. I'm thinking off the top of my head right now, NSF would be maybe a good place to start kind of looking at.
The next question, does the amount or value of in-kind services reduce the amount of a grant requested?
Typically not. And really it just adds value. And I'm sorry to jump back and forth a little bit. So to answer that question, no. But going back to the previous question about grants, another place to look at grants, possibly for that undergraduate program, I think Department of Labor and Workforce Development is a big untapped area. So, and I haven't had as much experience with that, but I know there's a lot of money in that area. Career technical education. If you can link it with that might be another place to look at.
Okay. I think we have time for just one or two more. And one question is, I've had difficulty getting administrative help in support of my grants. Do you have any recommendations on how to approach this type of situation?
That's a great question. And so I think this is good in that it kind of brings us full circle. In the pre-survey, people talked about time. And again, when you have a difficult time getting an administrator on board, quite often it's because they're under the same time constraints that you are. So what I've had great success in getting people to partner is when I can be very, very clear on the commitment that this person's making. If I can go to an administrator and say, principal, here's what's going to happen. You're going to attend 2 meetings that are 45 minutes each and write a letter, and I will give you a sample of that letter. I'll write it for you. That's great. That way somebody gets to see exactly how much time they're putting in, and they're more likely to agree to come on board. Likewise, as difficult as it is for people to get administrators to come on board, when I talked about impact, I get teachers telling me, I can't get another teacher in my department to partner with me. And quite often it's the same thing. What are you expecting them to do? Can you very concretely, very concisely tell them, if you partner with me, we're going to get the equipment that will enable you to do, a dielectrophoresis lab that would hit these standards in your content area. So once again, I think people are looking for very clear messages of how much time and how much expectation is put upon them. And if you can do that, then they're more likely to join you.
Well, thank you very much, Stan. We're out of time. I'd like to thank you all for joining us, and I hope that you'll be able to join us for another webinar that we'll be hosting in the future. Have a great evening.
Thank you. Goodbye.